Hello and welcome to the International Daily Roundup by People's Dispatch, where we bring you some of the major news developments of the day. Our headlines are: Malaysia's turmoil continues as the Anwar Ibrahim and Mahathir Mohamad camps scramble for parliamentary majority. Clashes in Haiti have brought the country to a warlike situation, says government. Israel attacks peaceful protests of Palestinians in the West Bank. US Supreme Court dismisses civil rights lawsuit against Border Patrol officer by family of the slain Mexican teenager. And Pakistan's court issues notice on petition seeking ban on Women's March. In our first story, the scramble for a parliamentary majority has begun in Malaysia as the opposition is pushing for a general election. On February 25th, the opposition political bloc led by the Barisan Nasional, along with the Islamist Gagasan Sejarah, have demanded a dissolution of the parliament to trigger a general election. The demand comes after a split in the ruling coalition Pakatan Harapan has left the government without a parliamentary majority. In the meanwhile, Pakatan Harapan has nominated Anwar Ibrahim as the Prime Minister to replace Mahathir Mohamad. To speak with us, we have Anish on the subject. Anish, so before we go into the latest developments, could you first give some general background on what is this alliance and who are the key players in this situation in Malaysia?
Okay, so beginning with the Pakatan Harapan, which has been ruling since 2018, it essentially is the coming together of two major rebel groups, one led by Mahathir, who came out of retirement in 2015-16 to create a government, to create a political formation against the ruling UMNO, which he was a prime minister of for 22, 23 years, until 2003. And his successor is somebody who he had major disagreements with, especially in how he dealt with laws regarding Sharia, which he wanted to introduce into the general public, and also apart from other than that, his treatment of ethnic and religious minorities. Disagreements. We're not talking about radical changes that they were expecting, but disagreements. On the other hand, Anwar Ibrahim was one of the deputy prime ministers for a very long time. He was a major senior leader of the UMNO, which has been ruling the country since beginning of the since their independence in 50s, and from there it went on to rule until 2018. Now, coming together, the charges of corruption against the Mahathir's successor and Najib Razak and his government, and all the investigation that came out about and the anti-incumbency against the government, they successfully created a majority government.
As in Mahathir and Anwar's coalition was able to create a...
Exactly, right. Yeah. But there was a catch in the government formation, in the sense that it was understood, it was almost like a deal, an unsaid deal, that Mahathir would come back as the prime minister, serve for a while, because Anwar Ibrahim was charged with certain criminal charges, sodomy to be very exact, and he was in jail at that time. So once Mahathir is as prime minister, he can actually apply for a royal pardon for Anwar, and that's what they did. Within a week, he actually got the pardon, and within a few months, he was out of jail. And by the end of 2018, he was an MP as well. Now, since then until now, there was a key part of the government formation that was not done, which was making way for Anwar to take over. Anwar was the one who actually who had the leading majority of constituents in the alliance, and he was the biggest favorite. It wasn't that Mahathir wasn't a popular leader, but it was Anwar who was supposed to take over. But that did not happen, and there was no key set date that Mahathir was setting out a way forward for the transition to happen. So on the surface of it, if you're talking, it was this major problem of transition of power that actually brought about to the end of the rolling up.
So what is the current situation, as in what is the stand of each of these players, and what about the opposition?
I mean, to speak in certain very general terms, in one way, Mahathir wants to, he's 95, but he still wants to protect his legacy. So if he is in active politics, he wants to protect his legacy of creating more space for the Malay majority in the country, and he wanted to do that, but the Pakatan Harapan government was more or less concerned about creating more avenues and appeasing the ethnic and religious minorities of the country, which are the Chinese, Indians, and others, including certain tribal groups in the eastern part of the country, the Sabah Sarawak provinces. This was a major disagreement within the alliance, which was something that they never really dealt with, and that has come to bite them right now. And because of this, Mahathir had many disagreements. He did not really agree with several of the policies that were brought about, especially in taking away the minimum income support system that was there for Malayan plantation owners, and the certain kind of affirmative action in certain key positions in government jobs and public sector jobs. And that was something that Mahathir was not really in favor of, but he went with it because he didn't have a major support within the alliance.
Right.
But he still enjoys a large, widespread popular support, especially among the Malayans, which the alliance itself doesn't. And in the previous election, they barely got about between a quarter and a third of the Malayan votes. It was mostly the minority, an overwhelming minority votes that actually brought about the electoral success
Right.
of this alliance. So these are some of the key issues that is affecting. Now, there is a certain thing with both the parties right now trying to create a government of their own. Mahathir yesterday hinted at a unity government at the federal level, which can actually even mean going back to the UMNO, bringing them in, back to the government, the process of the government, and also maybe aligning with the Islamists, with who he had major disagreements with, historically speaking, but he probably might join hands with them. And even the party that he was represented within the alliance, the Bersatu, even though he has resigned from the leadership, apparently from the leadership position, but it still pretty much goes towards his line.
Mm-hmm.
So they have left the alliance, and they will support him in any
Right.
case as the prime ministerial candidate.
Right.
So it is pretty much now Pakatan Harapan, the rest of Pakatan Harapan, that minus the Bersatu party, and the rest and the others in the parliament. We have to understand that none of them
Can
not even-
individually form the government.
Yeah, because none of them actually have a majority, not even close to a majority. You are talking about a parliament of 222. You need 112 members to support you. The opposition combined, they have 120. There are few independents that are not committed and probably may not commit. So it is yet to be seen if a government is going to be formed.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the Barisan Nasional that the UMNO leads and the Islamists are actually looking for a general election, and which they believe will be more beneficial to them, because there is a certain dip in popularity in the Pakatan Harapan among the general public, especially even among the minorities.
Right.
Especially because of some of the certain slowdown in growth recently, and certain policies that had taken away, not very drastically, but taken away some important or more popular welfare measures. And that is probably going to affect their performance if an election happens within the next few months.
Right. Thank you so much, Anish. In our next story, on February 25th, the commanders of the Haitian Army and Police have agreed to find solutions to the violent clashes between their cadre that has been raging on for the past 2 days. This comes as the government has described the incidents as a warlike situation. A government statement confirmed attempts at reconciliation, stating that the two forces would work together to safeguard democracy in order to restore a stable and peaceful environment in the country. The army chief and the police director also expressed regret over the deaths in the violence. The violence began on February 23rd when Haitian police officers demonstrated at the national capital of Port-au-Prince. The officers were demanding an increase in wages, better working conditions, and the right to unionize to guarantee their rights within the hierarchical police machinery. During the protest, the army alleged that a group of policemen wearing civilian clothes attacked the army headquarters located in Champs de Mars near the presidential palace. This led to an escalation of violence and an exchange of fire between the two forces. The shooting lasted for more than 6 hours. One policeman and a soldier died as a result, and about a dozen people were injured. The next day, on February 24th, police officials continued with their protests and held several demonstrations in different parts of the capital. The police officers received the support of common citizens who have been protesting against the US-backed government of President Jovenel Moise since July 2018. Since the beginning of the year, the police force has carried out several protests for their demands. However, until now the government has ignored these demands. This has led to police officers to take drastic measures in the past days. The Israeli army on Tuesday attacked peaceful, non-violent Palestinian protesters in the northern regions of the Jordan Valley of the occupied West Bank. Several protesters were injured at the hands of Israeli soldiers who used live-fire rounds of rubber-coated metal bullets, tear gas bombs and concussion grenades. The protesters were demonstrating near the Israeli military checkpoint at Tayasir, east of the West Bank city of Tubas. They were protesting the ongoing Israeli annexation and colonization of Palestinian lands, and the repeated Israeli plans to annex the whole of the Jordan Valley. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society confirmed that 5 Palestinians were transferred to a nearby hospital for medical treatment. 40 others also endured effects of tear gas inhalation, such as suffocation. Earlier, the soldiers also prevented Palestinian protesters from crossing the checkpoint in order to enter the Jordan Valley. The demonstration was organized by the National Committee Against the Annexation Wall and Colonies and the Palestinian Fatah Movement's Anti-Colonies Committee in Tubas. Local Palestinian sources said that approximately 1,000 Palestinians took part in the protest. The protesters also denounced the Middle East peace plan put forward by US President Donald Trump and the ever-expanding Israeli illegal Jewish settlements. The in charge of the Jordan Valley's affairs in the city of Tubas, Motaz Bashrat, confirmed that the soldiers prevented the protesters from accessing the Jordan Valley area. He also stated that multiple Palestinian anti-settlement and anti-war organizations had come together and called for popular protests. In our next story, the United States Supreme Court dismissed a civil rights lawsuit by the parents of Sergio Hernandez Guerca, a 15-year-old Mexican killed by a cross-border shooting by the US Border Patrol in 2010. In a split judgment by a margin of 5-4, the Supreme Court upheld the judgment of a lower court dismissing the lawsuit against Border Patrol officer Jesus Mesa Jr., who was responsible for the shooting of the teenager from across the US-Mexico border. Hernandez died in Mexican territory very close to the international border, separating El Paso in Texas from Ciudad Juarez in Mexico. The majority verdict was based on the reasoning that since the victim was killed in Mexican territory, it was beyond the purview of US courts, despite the fact that the shooting took place from US soil. The court stated that it is for the US Congress to decide whether it must be taken up. The court has a conservative majority, with appointments made after President Trump took over. The minority verdict argued that since the incident happened very close to the border, with a border zone jointly maintained by the two countries, the matter is definitely within the ambit of the US courts. The Mexican side has long maintained that Mesa Jr. must be indicted for the crime. As US officials refused to prosecute Mesa Jr., attempts were made to extradite him to Mexico to stand trial. But the administration of the then President Barack Obama had rejected it, a policy that continued under the Trump administration. And finally, ahead of the International Women's Day Aurat March scheduled on March 8th, the Lahore High Court in Pakistan issued a notice to the provincial and federal government over an application that seeks a ban on the procession. The petitioner deemed that the procession was anti-state in its modus operandi. Chief Justice Rashid Sheikh of the Lahore High Court issued the directives on a petition filed by Advocate Azhar Siddiqui that argued against the march. The petition noted that some allegedly anti-state parties were funding the Aurat March with the sole objective of spreading anarchy and hatred and vulgarity. Following the first Aurat March that happened in November, the Women's March has triggered a national debate across Pakistan between progressives and conservatives. In August last year, the Women's Action Forum recalled how the defamation laws in Pakistan were politically being used as a silencing tool, with an alarming rise in the registration of criminal defamation cases against individuals speaking or reporting on specific incidents of harassment, assault and rape. In its introductory event titled Aurat Jalsa, scheduled next month, the members of the Women Action Forum in a statement have stated that they have received misogynistic messages along with rape and death threats and even threats of blowing up the venue. The collective will be organizing people from different circles to encourage debate on matters affecting women which includes reporting of sexual violence. That's all we have for this episode of the International Daily Roundup. To read more about these stories, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Thanks for watching.
De pie cantar que vamos a triunfar, avanza